on ASEAN and Indonesia's chairmanship. What's the game plan? Can ASEAN step up to meet the present challenges? As we are all aware, this year is marked by rising geopolitical tensions in many parts of the world. We all knew the geopolitical tension in Ukraine, which is still ongoing, which also have repercussions here in Southeast Asia and beyond. We also witness an increasing geopolitical tensions with the rise of unilateral arrangements in Indo-Pacific regions. At the same time, we are witnessing that this region, Southeast Asia, is increasingly becoming an epicentrum of this geopolitical competition. So many questions then arise, especially on the role of ASEAN. So today, with our esteemed speakers, we have ambassadors here, as well as important, influential observer of the region, which I will introduce one by one. But I would like to start with a question to all of you. So the question is, can ASEAN step up to meet present challenges? Those who believe that ASEAN will meet these present challenges, please show your hands. Do you believe in ASEAN? That ASEAN will be able to meet the present challenges? The ASEAN optimist, please raise your hands. It's not majority, or maybe it's ASEAN way of showing expression of opinion. I think our speakers are all very optimistic, so we will ask them to convince us today that ASEAN is ready to meet the present challenges. I would like to invite our speakers today. The first would be His Excellency Dery Aman, the ambassador or the permanent representative of Indonesia to ASEAN. Please welcome Ambassador Dery Aman. Morning, Pak. The second speaker is His Excellency Kok Lipeng, the permanent representative of Singapore to ASEAN. Please welcome. Ambassador. Thank you. Nice. The third speaker is His Excellency Jayant Khobragad, the ambassador of India to ASEAN. Please, sir. And last but not least, we have in our event today, Professor Richard Javad Heydarian, Senior Lecturer at the ASEAN Center of the University of Philippines. Excellent too. So this event is supported by FPCI with the partnership of Universitas Pelita Harapan and Universitas Slamet Riyadi. And please give our big round of applause to the sponsors. So it seems that most of the participants here are rather skeptical if we see the number of hands raised on whether they are optimistic that ASEAN will meet the current challenges. So I would like to open this discussion with asking all of the speakers to have their 3 minutes statement on is ASEAN going to be able to answer the present challenges, the increasing geopolitical tensions, the post-pandemic recoveries, and the complexities of it. I would like to start with Ambassador Dery Aman. Please, your 3 minutes, and I apology for trying to be strict. 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. A very good afternoon to everyone. Well, I can understand if participants are skeptical, as the moderator said. It's a matter of how we, myself, Ambassador Li Peng, and our good friend, external partner, Ambassador Jayan, can manage this expectation. Because after the G20, there seems to be a trend that everyone is expecting high on the agenda. And this is an extra pressure for ASEAN chairmanship, Indonesia's chairmanship in ASEAN. So the question is not whether can ASEAN step up to meet its challenges next year, but I would say that ASEAN has no other choice but must step up to meet the present challenges. So following it up with the G20 presidency, Indonesia's chairmanship in 2023 will, of course, try to continue and strengthen what we have achieved through our presidency in G20. It's, of course, not a simple thing, not an easy task, but ASEAN, of course, you have to see it in a different way than the presidency of G20. In ASEAN, we have this ASEAN centrality, we have our solidarity, we have our strength within ASEAN, together with our external partners, which are major players in the Indo-Pacific region. So it's for Indonesia to show, to demonstrate that we are indeed there to meet up the challenging times in the near future. So Indonesia's chairmanship will assume 1st January 2023, so 1.5 months to go for me and all my colleagues, Indonesian colleagues, to try to be a leader of ASEAN, to try to work together with our ASEAN colleagues and our external partners in moving forward the agendas of ASEAN as mentioned in the theme to meet the present challenges. And most importantly, I think I should share with you the theme of Indonesia's Chairmanship 2023. It's ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. So ASEAN Matters signifies that we want to see ASEAN to remain strategic, significant, and relevant to the challenges, to the geopolitical and geoeconomic situation that we are going to face in the future, especially next year. Epicentrum of growth. It's about maintaining what ASEAN has achieved all these years in terms of its development, its growth, its progress in the region. And as we face the economic crisis, we should be proud. ASEAN community should be proud that we have managed to maintain relatively above average economic growth. So the importance of ASEAN, growth, and therefore we hope we meet our challenges. Thank you very much.
Ambassador. Big applause for Ambassador. I think it's pretty clear. It's not an option. ASEAN must be relevant. ASEAN matters. ASEAN must show that it matters and it tries to be the epicentrum of growth. I would like to ask His Excellency Ambassador Kok Li Peng for answering the question.
Okay. Very good afternoon. Selamat siang to everybody. I'd like to open by referring to a recent opinion op-ed in Financial Times written by Professor Adam Tooze. And his first para says, pandemic, drought, floods, megastorms, and wildfires, threats of a third world war, how rapidly we are becoming inured to the list of shocks. The title of his piece was Welcome to the World of the Polycrisis. So, ladies and gentlemen, my friends and colleagues, all of us are currently navigating a polycrisis. And I think this is aptly captured in the conference's metaphor of a turbulent ocean. Here in the Southeast Asian region, all the countries understand that our region straddles very strategic trading routes and sea lanes, and we are closely watching the realignment of partners and interests and how this will impact all of us. What is the stake? The stake is the direction that our region will head into next. We have benefited from many decades of relative peace and stability during the Cold War. Part of it was also because we were focused on developing our respective countries. And the Southeast Asian region and the countries have always been very clear-eyed about the challenges, and we have devised strategies to keep our region peaceful and stable in order to let us continue to grow and develop. So in this context, 55 years ago, we created ASEAN. It is the cornerstone of our regional architecture. ASEAN was designed to be open, inclusive, and through ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries try to hold on to the center of our region with the support of our partners who also prize peace, stability, and prosperity. So while the US and China remain very important partners for us, we have also invited India, Canada, ROK, Japan, Australia. We want more and more people to invest in Southeast Asia to feel that they can benefit from this. And we are doing this through ASEAN. So the value proposition of ASEAN is not immediately obvious, but it is there, and it has benefited all of us for 55 years now. I think all of you, maybe not all of you are 55, I'm not 55 yet, but I think it's very important to point out that for 55 years, our region has not had conflict. There has not been war fought in Southeast Asia. It's no coincidence that as ASEAN expanded and brought in more new members, our circle of peace has widened as well.
Apologies, His Excellency. We will continue to more comments and more questions later, but thank you very much for your initial comment. Now we are going to move to the third speaker, Ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Jayant Khobragade. Please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chopin. Good afternoon. Selamat siang. So my distinguished colleagues have already said, have already given a perspective and set the stage. I would like to make a few points. First of all, I really feel privileged to participate in this session for the first time as the comprehensive strategic partner of ASEAN, which we have achieved two weeks back, thanks to the support which we have received from all the ASEAN member states. As Ambassador Dedi has mentioned, that theme for the next year is ASEAN Matters Epicentrum of Growth. So let me, make some comments and arguments around that theme. As Ambassador Li Peng has mentioned, that ASEAN has completed in the month of August 55 years of its existence. It's not only existence, of ASEAN for 55 years, but its consolidation and its growth that confirms that it is relevant for itself as well as for the region. India became partner of ASEAN in 1992, so it was 30 years back. And it almost coincided with the end of the Cold War and the beginning of talk of a multipolar world. And we firmly believe that deepening of partnership between ASEAN and India can play a very significant role. India, although we have partners, we are partners for 30 years, but our relationship, it goes back to 2 millennia. So that's how we have become natural partners. If you look at language, food, costume, tradition, etc., there are many commonalities. That gets reflected in our global perspective. And even when we talk about interest of the developing countries, it is ASEAN and India. They stand together and promote and defend the interest of the developing countries. Uh, Another example of we being natural partners is that most of us are maritime nations. So India's Indo-Pacific initiative and ASEAN's outlook on Indo-Pacific, we have a joint statement on that. That actually talks about how our views and principles coincide on this region. Another simple example that we are natural partners is that when some leader statement come for negotiation, most of the time the zero draft is acceptable to India, and we are actually ready to accept all those arguments, comments, and principles. Another important aspect, last aspect, is ASEAN centrality. When we talk about ASEAN matters, so the retention of ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific region, that is most important. India has always supported ASEAN centrality in the evolving regional architecture. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. Ends with a note on India's support for ASEAN centrality. I'd like to ask Professor Richard Haidarian to give his initial
I'll be
comment.
quick since I'm not the excellency guy. I'm just gonna try to keep it as excellent as possible.
Professor Excellent.
Yeah, I always thought like giving a talk after lunch is the worst thing. Apparently now we're giving talk during lunch, right? So I'll try to behave myself as much as possible. Considering I said a lot of controversial things in the previous panel exactly here. The first thing I want to say is that I'm glad that finally Indonesia is no longer the world's biggest invisible nation, right? I mean, for a very long time, Indonesia was not getting the recognition and appreciation it wanted. There are many reasons for that. Maybe they were more colorful people like Marcos, Duterte, like Aung San Suu Kyi, all sorts of people. Maybe there's aspect of that. But the other thing is, obviously, as a good friend of our Donald Emerson put it in a foreign affairs piece in the 1980s, is that there's a big gap between the importance of Indonesia and the recognition it's getting. And I'm glad that this year that is changing, thanks to G20, thanks to efforts by President Jokowi to mediate not only between Russia and Ukraine, but also between the United States and China. And hence we had the Bali detente, right? So I'm very glad that that's happening because it's important for us to have the biggest nation in Southeast Asia getting the recognition it needs in order to exercise the leadership it needs to exercise within ASEAN. As I say, ASEAN cannot exercise global leadership if there's no leadership within ASEAN, right? That's just how it works in any regional organization. EU wouldn't have become EU prior to Brexit if not for France, for Italians, for the others playing also their leadership role. The next thing I want to say is this. If ASEAN doesn't get its act together, meaning it continues to face paralysis in decision on the most important and pressing issues like South China Sea, like Myanmar, among others, I think it's almost inevitable, and we're already seeing signs of this, and please disagree with me if you want, that some countries in ASEAN are gonna just go their own way as a middle power. We already saw how Indonesia is feeling its way as a G20 member, and it has all the reasons to feel its way as a G20 member. And down the road, as countries like Vietnam and Philippines become trillion-dollar GDPs, they already have more than 100 million people. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we keep on saying ASEAN is a bunch of small countries. We're not small. I mean, you guys are bigger than Brazil, almost US population. No one says Mexico is small, but the Philippine population is almost as big as Mexico, right? Many of us are just gonna be middle powers on our own, and ASEAN is just gonna be that organization here in Jakarta, which is more like a small and medium enterprise without a human rights charter, right? I mean, just the capability of ASEAN as an organization is extremely limited, right? So we need to build the capacity of ASEAN, but within ASEAN, countries have to step up and empower ASEAN. And lastly, because I look forward to the question and answer part, as a non-excellency member here, I know there's a lot of frustration, right, with how ASEAN is not doing enough on many fronts. But let me tell you this, I'd rather have the beautiful mess that we have right now in this part of the world than being reduced to an intramural between US and China. That is why I'm extremely happy that our friends in India, our friends in Japan, in Australia, among others, are engaging us. So do not demonize Quad. Do not demonize Europeans for getting more involved here. This is not the 19th, 18th, 17th century of colonialism. This is the 21st century. We need partners, and we need to make sure this is not the US-China competition. This is about our region, and this is about our future. So I'll keep it there, looking forward to the question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Excellent remark, I think, and it well connected and connected to all the initial remarks by the Excellency. So I would like to follow that with a question, because Professor Richard mentioned about that Indonesia is no longer invisible due to the G20. A lot of expectations from within ASEAN, which sees the increasingly beautiful mess in the Indo-Pacific, and also from the domestic audience because of the spectacle of the G20. A lot of pressures on you, Pak Dery, on ASEAN chairmanship next year. So I would like to go direct to the question on what are the priorities and programs of Indonesia's chairmanship, and what do you see as the greatest challenges and risks during Indonesia's chairmanship?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Again, as I have mentioned earlier in my previous statement, the theme itself already signifies what we are going to do with our ASEAN chairmanship. ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. It will reflect the three community pillars of ASEAN: political security, economic pillar, and the socio-cultural pillar. So ASEAN Matters will derive to the political security pillar, and the epicentrum of growth will reflect the economic and socio-cultural pillar. So those are the main headlines. And of course, with the developments and the dynamism that we are seeing in the global world, in the region, it is clear for ASEAN that we need, as it is the theme of this wonderful event, to navigate in a turbulent ocean. We are facing the same thing in our region, in the ASEAN region, in the Indo-Pacific region. So it's very relevant, it's very true, and very valid. So therefore, ASEAN, what we want to underline is we are here to cooperate, cooperation, collaboration, partnership. We engage with our partners, with our players who wants to be in the Indo-Pacific region. As mentioned, the Europeans now is interested on having a strategy on Indo-Pacific. All other countries are having those strategies. But the important thing is that ASEAN centrality. In our region, in the ASEAN region, in the Indo-Pacific region, everyone must respect and must take into consideration ASEAN centrality. We have the ASEAN outlook in the Indo-Pacific. It's all about cooperation, collaboration, and partnership with all our external partners, whether they are dialogue partners, sectoral or development partners, or any other parties which are interested to cooperate with ASEAN in trying to have this Indo-Pacific region which is prosperous, which is progressive, which is meaningful to its people. So AYP will be one of Indonesia's priorities. All other priorities may derive from our agenda in the G20, such as global health infrastructure and digital transformation, sustainable development goals. So those are the specifics, but the broad picture is about how ASEAN can meet the challenges, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. And for that, ASEAN must play its central role. And we are hoping, Indonesia as chair, we're hoping that together with our ASEAN colleagues, with our partners, we can make it happen that the region is something which is meaningful for the people of ASEAN. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The choice of the topic, like the ASEAN Matters, is also interesting because it is like saying to the external actors as well to inside that we should look ASEAN and its centrality as important in the regional architecture, and ASEAN is ready to cooperate. And related to that, I would like to continue by asking Ambassador Kok Lipek on how could ASEAN actually convince external actors that it matters, that ASEAN matters, that ASEAN can still be central despite the increasing geopolitical tension. Do you see ASEAN is going to able to do that? And what it takes to do that?
I think that half the battle is already won because of our geographical location. 2/3 of international trade is shipped through the South China Sea. That alone will focus everyone's attention on Southeast Asia. Secondly, our governments have all been very pragmatic. Since winning our independence, we have focused on growth, mutual cooperation for mutual benefit. And it is no surprise that today, Southeast Asia remains one of the few global nodes of growth. IMF expects us to grow by 5% this year, notwithstanding all of the challenges, and they expect us to grow at about 4.7% next year. I want to point out one other fact for everyone, in case you missed it. There's been a lot of news in the news. For the first time in many years, Southeast Asia is expected to grow faster than China. China has always outstripped us in terms of speed and scale, but next year we are predicted to grow a bit faster than China. I'm not going to talk about India because India is like now the star performer of the region and we're all trying to compete with you. But we're also working with our comprehensive strategic partner and we hope to do something on the trade front. Okay. The other thing is that we are constantly renewing this value proposition. People want to work with us because they want to grow with us and we give them reasons to do so. Last year, we concluded the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or the RCEP, and this is the world's largest free trade agreement. I know that free trade, globalization are very controversial concepts today, but all of us in the region have been benefiting from our FTAs with partners. So this is something I think we are very proud of. We're also linking up our region with others. This year, we concluded the Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement, or CATA. This is an air services agreement with the EU. So this is the first of its kind. ASEAN as a bloc and the 27 countries of the EU as a bloc have sealed this agreement, and it's going to help lift our aviation sector. It's going to help lift our tourism sector. And I think that this CATA is also designed to be an open agreement. So in time to come, once it comes and enters into force and airlines start to make use of it, hopefully we can extend it to other regions and other countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Listening to Your Excellency make me more optimistic about ASEAN. I hope you all also feels the same. But the problem is it's not only ASEAN here. People are attracted to come to the region and each of these actors are having their own interests. So I would like to ask His Excellency Jayan Khobragad, the Ambassador of India to ASEAN, to share his perspective on what will the geopolitical rivalry in the region, which then now extend to Indo-Pacific, which then also includes India, will influence ASEAN. You mentioned that India is respecting ASEAN centrality, but at the same time, there are many concerns about the rising minilateral arrangements, the Quad, in which India is part of it. So could you please give some comments on that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I would also like to briefly comment on your previous question about ASEAN matters. You know, if you look at the number of countries having policy, Indo-Pacific policy, it is growing, you know, almost month by month. And that shows the amount of interest, you know, the amount of interest the entire globe is taking in the Indo-Pacific. In fact, in my opinion, this is the most discussed region constructively presently in the world. When it comes to ASEAN centrality, in India's perspective, of course, we have Act East policy, we have, our own initiative on Indo-Pacific, Indo-Pacific's Oceans Initiative. But when we talk about ASEAN centrality, what do we mean? We mean, first of all, we keep ASEAN at the center. What does that mean? It means that we keep the interest of ASEAN at the center. Our focus on ASEAN does not get diluted, and our relationship grows. Relationship in all its dimension, not only about having comprehensive strategic partnership, of course it's matter of great pride, but in all other dimensions, means trade, investment, people to people contact. Our trade has grown in last financial year to $110 billion. Now of course in actual terms it looks little lower as compared to other countries, but this is 10% of India's global trade, which is almost compared to India's trade with European Union. Second is investment, the outbound investment. India's 20% outbound investment, it comes to ASEAN, thanks of course to the financial institutions of Singapore, but it comes to this region. 20% of India's outbound tourists, they come to ASEAN member states. So that is the extent of our relationship. On the top of that, we have a lot of diaspora, around 14% of India's diaspora, which lives here, which also acts as the bridge. When it comes to the minilaterals, it is surprising that people have some issues with the forum like Quad, which is quite constructive. And ASEAN is always used to deal with the regional forums. There are so many, if you call them as minilaterals, there are so many within the ASEAN, with the dialogue partners, like for example, we are having Mekong Ganga, which is very successful, And in fact, if you look at this year, IPF, 7 of ASEAN member states joined this Indo-Pacific Economic Forum. So this is not new, because everything synergizes. So we actually work in that spirit.
Yeah, a
Thank
very
you.
short addition. Will ASEAN work together with Quad?
We are looking forward, and I think the first indication which we already got is that when Quad vaccines were presented to 2 of the member states, they accepted it with a lot of graciousness. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Then after all the answer, which is all I think in a positive tone, I'd like to ask Professor Haydarian, which I expect to be more, how to say, frank, less diplomatic, on what would be the...
I want to be ambassador one day too, I'm just saying.
What
Maybe
would be
next admin.
the fate of ASEAN centrality in this increasing geopolitical tension with Quad, AUKUS? What would be the response of ASEAN on that? Will ASEAN centrality be there?
First of all, I think when it comes to Quad, it's both a challenge and an opportunity. I have the official position from no less than Secretary Jai Shankar earlier this year when I asked him during the Munich Security Conference, what do you have to say about this accusation that Quad is NATO with Asian characteristics? And I think we clearly saw India's position on Russia-Ukraine issues showing that they're not part of any coherent alliance with the rest of the Quad members, and that this is much more ad hoc. But for me, even if Quad is at least partly about constraining the worst instincts of China, not containing, but constraining the worst instinct of China, I think that's a good thing for ASEAN because there's a limitation to how far we can do that on our part. But more than that, it's also a challenge, and I think we are trying to respond to that. If you look at the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, the whole point was to make sure that the term Indo-Pacific is not just a Western or a Quad thing, but is a much more inclusive and regionally driven idea. I remember when I wrote my book Indo-Pacific 3 years ago, shameless plug-in, probably it's there in my introduction, I had a hard time getting ASEAN people endorsing my book. I had folks in the US, like, no problem. They gave fantastic endorsement. But once I asked ASEAN people, including former ASEAN Secretary General people, they say, oh, that's so Trump, that's so Shinzo Abe, But now, Indo-Pacific is like commonly used even in media language. Everyone is using it. Korea has an Indo-Pacific paper now. The Europeans have it. So the stigma is gone. And I think the stigma is gone partly because of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. So don't say ASEAN is useless. Now, speaking of ASEAN, my goodness, let's not forget the backstory. We came from a Game of Thrones situation. back in the 60s and 70s, right? I mean, go to the Middle East today, they would love to have something like ASEAN, which is, to kind of paraphrase Churchill, better jaw than war, right? I would always choose the jaw, but you want to go more than jaw, actually achievement, right? And on that, I really think the way forward is a squad, not only a quad. I think not only Singapore, but key members of ASEAN can work with Quad and other like-minded powers to maintain a free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific order. I think we can definitely do that. And for me, the possibility of East Timor becoming a member of ASEAN down the road, I know some members have their ideas about that, will actually, I think, push boundaries of ASEAN strategic imagination to South Pacific, right? To the Western Pacific, where we're not exercising as much influence. So my point is, whether we want it or not, right, it is true that we have limitations in our autonomy, but it's a 50 shades of autonomy, right? On some areas, ASEAN has more influence than the other, and some ASEAN countries can have more influence. So let's focus on our areas of strength, make the most out of it, and at the same time, of course, in areas of weakness, let's be honest about it, let's be realistic about it, and let's work on it. Otherwise, you're just setting up people for disappointment. I think I'm not going to help my career for being a diplomat. I mean, like suddenly I'm like, I'm not sure I should have said that, but hoping,
please.
let's go. Let's do this.
Thank you very much, Professor. I was a bit worried because you mentioned Game of Thrones. It didn't end well, right? So hopefully the story will be better in Southeast Asia. But before moving to the free and open session for question and answer, I'd like to one question which all speakers can answer on. A lot of mention about how ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific is crucial and going to be crucial. So I'm wondering on how the AOIP would be advanced in the next chairmanship, in Indonesia's chairmanship. Pak Dery?
So perhaps I'll start since it's the AOIP, and everyone should know that Indonesia is one of the proponents of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. But before that, I just would like to comment, it's good that we have this kind of setting where we have 3 diplomats. You can see on how we respond, the 3 of us, it's almost the same tone, boring things. But we have Richard, sorry. It's good that we have Richard, so he spices a little bit the situation.
I don't think the ambassadors are boring, but yeah, we got the point.
Well, back to the AOIP, this is an ASEAN concept. It is very important and strategic for ASEAN to come up with this concept because we already anticipated that almost every country, every player would like to have its footprints in the Indo-Pacific region with those kind of strategies. So when we came up with the AOIP, it was a real momentum where we could demonstrate to our partners, to other countries beyond the ASEAN region, that the Indo-Pacific is there. But if you want to, let's say, do something together in the Indo-Pacific region, ASEAN matters. There is the ASEAN centrality, and there is the concept of the ASEAN outlook in the Indo-Pacific. Now, 2023, it's clear for Indonesia as a proponent and of course supported by our colleagues, including Singapore in ASEAN, that it's time for us to really mainstream and implement this outlook. What we are looking at is having practical cooperation with ASEAN, with its partners. These partners, of course, here India and other dialogue partners of ASEAN, or any other interested partners of ASEAN and parties who would like to work with ASEAN in progressing the Indo-Pacific region. So this is of a ASEAN-led mechanism plus. So we have the ASEAN Plus 1, we have the ASEAN Plus 3, we have the ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum, we have the EAS, the East Asia Summit. But with the AOIP, we can, of course, with the consent of ASEAN, we can have a combination of these ASEAN-led mechanism. So I think in the morning opening ceremony, Pak Dino, Ambassador Dino, mentioned who believes that US and China can work together in the Indo-Pacific. I raise my hand because we have the AOIP. It's there for them to work together with ASEAN in the Indo-Pacific. And it's open to UK, European Union, India. We are looking at that kind of collaboration. So it's inclusive and open-ended. And it's about the Indo-Pacific region and where ASEAN implements its centrality.
Thank you very much, Pak Dery. Very interesting take on how, please, if you want to give applause, don't hesitate. To reinterpret the Indo-Pacific not as great power construct, but as something which is inclusive and could facilitate cooperation between a different stakeholder. One more answer from the speaker, and then we will move to the Q&A session. Do you want to take or okay? Let's just move directly to. Do you want to give a short comment? Yes.
A short one. I would like to add one thing. Ambassador Dery Aman has already talked about, mainstreaming of AOIP. I think one little bit of hindrance which is coming is because, if you look at the East Asia Summit process, there are some countries who have hesitation to use, the word ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. But we see that there is a gradual improvement in their stand. In fact, this week only we had ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, and there is one joint declaration on harmonized security, and that mentions AOIP. So that's a good development. I think, next year we hope that under Indonesia's leadership in East Asia Summit document, all the participant countries, they support AOIP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So let's move to the free and open question. Not completely free because I will limit the number of the question because of the time. So we will start with the first session, 3 questions from the audience. Ma'am, you first. Please introduce your name and affiliation. And
hello, my name is Grace Sabandar. I'm the founder of Ambassador and CEO Club. I would like to know the standpoint of ASEAN in digitalization, especially in blockchain and metaverse.
ASEAN's position on digitalization, especially in blockchain and metaverse. I think there was a discussion on digital issues also in the G20 as well as in previous ASEAN meetings. So I would like to request for two more questions before moving to the speakers. Second, and then the third. Yes, please. Yes. The man with the white mask.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Faki. I'd like to ask to Mr. Ambassador.
Which ambassador?
Indonesian ambassador to ASEAN. So there are some criticisms regarding, as Professor Richards already mentioned, that ASEAN not doing enough, in particular with what happens in Myanmar. So is there any specific program as a chairman next year to respond to this, or will Indonesia still rely on 5-point consensus to deal with this problem? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important question on Myanmar. And the third, I think, yes, please, Pak.
Thank you very much. My name is Muhran Agus Mulyani from Palembang. I'm going to have the questions for Professor Richard Haydarian. Kamustaka, Professor. I was in 2004 in Philippines, so I saw the same cultures, lifestyle of Philippines and Indonesia. what I'm going to ask from you, I need your opinion. Please extend your opinion about we have sustainable development goals. It is 17 point, just like what we have: no poverty, zero hunger, and good health, and blah blah blah. So, what is the policy of the President's Bongbong Marcos of this issue? Comparing with Jokowi, our president's policy to strengthen our game goal, game plan, what we are discussed today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there a Philippine ambassador around here?
Not directly about ASEAN, but yeah, maybe.
Salamat.
Maybe we can take one more question.
Yeah.
Set it for everyone.
So let's go to the answer session. First on digitalization, I think Singapore played a lot of role in that. So maybe I'd like us to start with Ambassador Kok Lee Peng.
Thank you very much for the question. Blockchain and metaverse, well, metaverse is not really taking off. I think there are reports that Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg have thrown in so much money, but for very little outcome. So maybe not bet on that yet. Blockchain, yes, because we are going digital. We were going very digital before the pandemic, and the pandemic has accelerated the digitalization of Southeast Asia. Think that this year's Google Temasek Bain report shows that our digital economy will reach $200 billion this year. And we are on track to getting $300 billion by 2030 or even earlier. These are not small numbers. I think we're also a region that has got a lot of unicorns from Indonesia especially. Singapore, well, we're good at getting money, channeling money, and we're happy to help support the growth of all these very promising startups. In terms of ASEAN, we have ASEAN Digital Master Plan 2025. We're updating it as we build a vision, post-2025 vision. We also have a digital economy framework agreement. That's going to be one of Indonesia's priorities for next year. And Singapore's working as closely with Indonesia. We want to support this. It's going to be very important for all of our digital economy inter alia. And we're also doing a lot on the cybersecurity front in terms of capacity training, capacity building, and also in trying to instill digital norms and standards for a safe digital space in Southeast Asia. I'll see my
Yeah. Thank you very much. Digital economy and digitalization is interesting because like Indonesian unicorn is listed in Singapore and have a lot of experts from India and expanding to Philippines. So I think everyone can answer, yeah? Pak Dery, do you want to give some comments on digitalization, or are you going to directly go to the Myanmar question?
Well, I'll add a little bit what Ambassador Kok Lee Peng just answered on the question related to digital issues. As I've mentioned earlier, Indonesia's chairmanship will also derive from our G20 presidency, where digital transformation was one of the priorities in G20. And this digital transformation issue or agenda will also be taken up in our ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. And as the ambassador has provided the information about the master plan 2025, I'm not aware of the specific issue that you have mentioned, but it's my homework to work on that. And perhaps we can further this issue or matter that you have asked once we are dealing with the specific issues of digital transformation. But I just wanted to emphasize and underline that digital transformation and what Ambassador Lee Peng has mentioned will be taken up in our chairmanship. So we will be open and stand ready to any views, inputs, and suggestions regarding digital transformation or any other issues that you would like to suggest that Indonesia should take up in our chairmanship next year?
Thank you. So important thing first is the continuity with the G20. Second is that Ambassador mentioned that Indonesian chairmanship is very open to still suggestions from the people. It's a people-centered organization, as we know. Okay, so what about the Myanmar question, Pak Dery? Okay.
I'll add to him.
Let's keep the difficult question later.
Now I see my value here. Like I'm the dumb side for the tough question. I'm okay. All right. Okay, let's do this. I hope I'm not gonna regret this panel. No, I mean as far as no, I mean seriously. I see there are a lot of apprehensions about East Timor joining, right? And I get some. I mean I know where it's coming from. I'm sure our Singaporean friends can share their points of view. The thing is, of course, in ASEAN, we never had the kind of a Copenhagen criteria, which kind of tries to make sure, at least in the case of EU, there's some sort of harmony. Of course, it didn't perfectly work, obviously. For us, the membership in ASEAN was based on political consideration, geographic consideration, not institutional consideration. So we never had institutional harmonization. But thankfully, thanks to Singapore and some of the members, we have the AIA, right? Like some of the capacity building initiatives, which definitely is not where it should be. But I think East Timor's prospective membership should be the impetus for us to invest in that more. Now, I know one concern, I'm seeing a lot of journalistic headlines on this, like, oh, if East Timor comes in, they're going to be a Chinese pawn and further undermine. Well, look at it. Cambodia this year was not a disaster, right? They didn't do too bad, right? I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, it's not so different from what happened before. When Laos was the chairman, it was not such a disaster, right? So, I mean, in fairness, I mean, I know 2012 was quite crazy, right? But I think it was more of an exception to the rule than a new trend line. And we saw in 2012 when Cambodia tried to block key issues like South China Sea, Indonesia stepped up to the plate. We had the 6 points principle. Martin Nataragawa did a fantastic job. So, you know, in fairness, sometimes we don't give ASEAN enough credit, and we don't give some of the so-called weaker links within ASEAN enough credit, right? But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that maybe that's why ASEAN minus X unilateralism also makes sense, because if you want to have everything 11 members unanimity, right, it's going to be very difficult to move on many fronts, right? Now I'm being more like a diplomat answer. So yeah, I'm sure
thank you.
more
His
on the Marcos Jr. one, I always said he's going to be more like his father than Tatay or Father Duterte, right? We call Duterte Tatay Digong. Because, you know, I mean, as far as Marcos Jr. is concerned, I think there's an aspiration to ASEAN leadership, which has been lacking for a very long time in the Philippines. I always joke, you know, we Filipinos, or at least in my case, we feel more at home in Mexico than in Malaysia, right? Like, we're much closer to Latin American countries in terms of our US-centric foreign policy, in terms of our culture. You know, I watch Narcos, probably. We can relate more to Narcos than some of the Korean pop, you know, K-drama. But that's changing. That's changing. I think after the wild swings we saw in the past 10 years in Philippine foreign policy, from super US-centric to super China-friendly, like what's going on, now we're seeing more balance. So I'm not going to say anything about domestic politics of the Philippines, but as far as the foreign policy of Marcos Jr. is concerned, I think finally the Philippines is in a very, I think, sweet spot, strategic sweet spot, whereby it can play the kind of intermediate role that Indonesia and others are playing. And in fact, if you look at it, the Philippines situation is very complicated more than almost all ASEAN countries. We're next to Taiwan, and there could be a war in Taiwan. We're a claimant in the South China Sea, and yet our relations with US and China is relatively stable so far. And I hope that Marcos Jr. invests more in ASEAN diplomacy and co-leadership. And the rapport that I saw between him and Jokowi, and between him, our Singaporean friends, was a very good starting point. So I know I'm kind of known as government critic back in the Philippines, but with this administration, I kind of like the foreign policy. So maybe I still have a hope to be a diplomat soon. Yeah?
Thank you very much. But you can find the answers on his Twitter account. A lot of comments on domestic politics. Yeah.
I just wanted to add about the digital thing, you know. See, of course, you know, I mean, there's no option but to use blockchains, you know. I mean, we started using it, for example, for our like shipping documents and all, you know. Basically, it is decentralized decision. But when it comes to collaboration with ASEAN, see, one of the important things is that you have to have manpower to use, to handle that digital technology. And in that sense, we are contributing, in capacity building. We have opened some center of excellence. For example, in Laos, that center which was established 2 years back, it has already trained, more than 200 experts, in very specialized areas. Similarly, like recently we have held one startup festival, in Bogor, which was quite successful, where a lot of, digital technologies, digital startups were also on display. So, just to get them familiarized with the ecosystem which is happening in India, as you know, that India has become now, one of the biggest producers of unicorns these days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now the difficult question, the elephant in the room, Myanmar.
I don't see any elephants. Well, I'll make a small comment first. Our moderator is very smart because he knows that someone from the floor will ask about Myanmar. He restrained himself asking about Myanmar during our question and answers. So, may I ask where you are from? Wow.
Yeah. No, but that's not my scenario.
Okay.
Autonomous.
No, I mean, are you Indonesian?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you're Indonesian. All right. So it's obvious that Indonesia's chairmanship will have to continue what Brunei, Cambodia has been trying to do with regard to the issue of Myanmar. It's obvious. There's no option to that. And it's clear, especially for the two of us, Indonesia and Singapore, that the Myanmar issue must be addressed and finalized amicably by Myanmaris as soon as possible. And ASEAN's reference, basic reference, and only reference is the 5-point consensus. So any expectations towards any chairmanship, any special envoy trying to address and undertake the issue of Myanmar should be compared with the 5-point consensus because that is the bar. There's no other bar. So if you compare it with others, you expect 5-point consensus plus. In ASEAN, there's no plus. So any chair, any special envoy will abide to the 5-point consensus, which you can see the 5 points. So we will try our best, as Brunei and Cambodia has tried to do, based on the 5-point consensus. So that is basically what we are going to do as chair, and later on, we will have the special envoy of ASEAN, represented by the chair of ASEAN, and we will, of course, try to progress with the 5-point consensus. The fundamental part or point that we need all to understand that we want Myanmar to respect and to implement the 5-point consensus, because that's what ASEAN has always taken as an ASEAN consensus. So as long as they don't abide to the 5-point consensus, then for ASEAN, it's something that Myanmar should take into consideration.
What would happen if Myanmar is not respecting the 5-point consensus?
Well, we will have to discuss it again among ASEAN, whether the 5-point consensus at that point of time in the future is still something relevant, or do we need a new guidance? But up to now, it's 5-point consensus. Yeah. But I believe Indonesia and Singapore views that the 5-point consensus is inclusive, it's comprehensive, it's something logical, and it's just for Myanmar to implement and to show that they are committed that they are committed to be a nation, to be a state, and respect what we have in ASEAN. And again, I also should emphasize that Myanmar is an ASEAN family. We are not thinking about anything else than that, but we are expecting Myanmaris to respect and implement the 5-point
Thank you very
consensus.
much, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another additional. Yeah, okay. Short answers from two ambassadors.
See, while Ambassador Derry has explained about 5-point consensus and we talk, about 5-point consensus together, I think we must also appreciate one of the points is, providing humanitarian assistance to Myanmar. The amount of effort which ASEAN has done, the ASEAN Secretariat, the AHA Center, I think we need to applaud that,
Thank you very much.
Myanmar is a part of the ASEAN family, but right now it's not functioning. And until everybody in Myanmar are ready to sit down and talk to each other, it's difficult to see when a political resolution will be found for the country. ASEAN has been, thank you very much, my comprehensive strategic partner. He gave a shout out to ASEAN for trying to send humanitarian aid to all Myanmars in need. But the reality also is that only the SAC can control access into the country. It's also a reality that the SAC has continued to ignore ASEAN's request for it to work with us to implement the 5-point consensus. So I think that in this context, earlier this month in Phnom Penh, our leaders sent a clear signal to the Myanmar military authorities that the latter needs to implement the 5-point consensus. I think you look at the points of decision that emerged from that summit, you may also have spotted that ASEAN intends to engage all stakeholders to help facilitate a peaceful resolution in Myanmar. This means that we're going to talk to all possible parties. And I think that under Indonesia's chairmanship, ASEAN has some hard work ahead for us. We have to go and think through who are all the stakeholders. We have to talk to the UN system. We have to talk to all the special envoys on Myanmar out there. There are quite a few. Meanwhile, we will continue to try to urge the military authorities to allow access for humanitarian assistance. The situation on the ground is not good. I think those of you who are following developments in Myanmar will understand this. But ASEAN is not giving up on our family member, and will continue to try to work hard next year to try to make some progress. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Yeah, don't hesitate. Family is a bit complicated because sometimes family problems are the most difficult problems in the world, right? I think all of the speakers provided us with excellent answers and reminds us that we need to appreciate ASEAN more. Sometimes it is overshadowed by the increasing geopolitical tension, seen as like smaller countries within or becoming the victim of the competition of great power rivalry. But we need to give ASEAN more credit for creating and shaping the region and beyond, as the speakers has mentioned. So I would like to apologize because we have to go to the closing statement now. But of course, the ambassadors, the excellencies are more inclusive, yeah, because the 4 speakers are all excellence, are still here, so you can ask them around later. But I would like to ask for the speakers to give their closing statement. Could be on some unasked questions like the South China Sea, maybe, or anything else. Please, Pak Derry, Ambassador Derry, do you want to start?
Maybe have the last.
Or maybe yes, maybe it will be reversed. So
Pass it down to me
Richard,
again, huh?
please.
Now I'm gonna be more
Professor
diplomatic.
Excellence, yeah.
No, actually, on the way to Indonesia, I was reading The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon, and he said something very beautiful to paraphrase it, like valor without virtue is essentially a recipe for disaster. And I think the problem here in ASEAN is that we kind of posture a lot, right? Even on Myanmar, right? We said, world, do not intervene. This is a family issue. We'll deal with it. So I'm glad that finally this year there was a recognition that we indeed need assistance from our external partners. We called on UN, we called our friends in EU and India, among others, to help us. I think we have to have strategic humility. And at the same time, we have to work on our capabilities. Because again, it's great to have valor, it's great to want to have centrality, but you have to back it up by capability, by virtue. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble, you're asking for disappointment. For me, you know, Filipinos, we love boxing. I think we're just in round 3 and 4. There's no knockdown. So much still can happen in ASEAN if we get things right, if we begin to believe in ourselves, and get to believe in Indonesia, hopefully to do its best next year. So see, I can be a good ambassador, you know? I'll keep it there. Thank you.
I think it's a good recommendation for being an ambassador. Okay, please.
So, as in the beginning, I have mentioned that we have become ASEAN's comprehensive strategic partner. This year, you know, we have celebrated 30th anniversary. So, by virtue of which, you know, we have had a lot of interaction at different levels. You know, we had, you know, special foreign ministers meeting. Then, you know, ASEAN Interparliamentary Assembly delegation visited India. We had, you know, first time ASEAN-India Defense Minister meeting, commemorative summit, etc. What I understood from all the interaction, I had the privilege to participate in all those meetings, understood that, you know, ASEAN at all levels, you know, at all levels, apart from, you know, their individual country's identity, there is one very strong ASEAN identity, you know, that has come out, you know, very, very well, you know, through all those interactions. And I'm looking forward to a very exciting, you know, coming year under the chairmanship of Indonesia, when all the visits will happen to this beautiful country. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You're done.
No, we are done.
Okay, you're done.
Thank you very
Okay.
much, Ambassador.
Thank you
Yes.
very much, Mr. Moderator. ASEAN has weathered many crises in the past: the Asian, the global financial crisis, the end of the Cold War, 9/11. We are now facing complex, cross-cutting, immediate crises: a pandemic, an invasion, climate change, vulnerable democracies. And the way forward in this turbulent ocean is to keep all of our 10 ships, the ASEAN member states, in constant communication with each other, all of us playing by the same set of rules and asking our partners to play by those rules as well. ASEAN must defend our centrality and unity now more than ever. And that is what Ambassador Derry and I are here to do. That's our job. And I'm very glad that I have a good colleague like Ambassador Jayan to work with. And I'm glad we have excellent professors to keep us on our toes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now,
So I see that 1 minute left for my closing statement. I'll try to be quick. To answer the theme, of course, Indonesia as chair next year in 2023, Indonesia will step up to meet the challenges. And of course, together with our ASEAN colleagues and with the support and cooperation from our partners in ASEAN. Secondly, the interaction in the ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific region, it's clear that we have a lot of guidance. We have the Treaty of Amity Cooperation, we have the Bali Principles, we have the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, we have the ASEAN Charter, we have the UN Charter. So it's all there. So once there are things which is not based on those guiding principles, ASEAN will say something. So to be optimistic with ASEAN next year, with our Indonesian chairmanship, I'm counting on everyone's support, whether you are Indonesians, whether you are ASEAN citizens, or even from the international community and ASEAN chairmanship. Whoever holds the ASEAN chairmanship will always need the support from everyone. Thank you very much.
thank you very much, Ambassador Derry Aman. Very strong and confident message that Indonesia will step up, and with Indonesia stepping up, ASEAN is going to step up to the challenge. Sometimes we ASEAN people tend to.
Voting once again.
Okay, now the request by the speakers to see the impacts of the discussion, who are confident that ASEAN will be able to address its challenges. Raise your hands. Who are optimistic about ASEAN? Thank you very much. I think you are successful speakers. You are making the audience confident. And I think that's good because sometimes we are very underappreciate ASEAN. Let's be more confident, but at the same time, more prudent. And let's us appreciate ASEAN more. And one of the appreciation is let's take picture in ASEAN way. Thank you very much. Let's close the session.